On July 22, 2015, in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, a quiet suburban night shattered into horror. Inside the Bever family's home, a massacre unfolded, 5 lives extinguished in a frenzy of violence. The perpetrators? 2 brothers, Robert and Michael Bever, who had been living among their victims. But what drove them to commit such an atrocity? Was it a cry for attention, a deep-seated resentment, or something more chilling? The surviving siblings, Crystal and Autumn, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. Crystal, though critically wounded, identified her brothers as the killers. But the story doesn't end there. The brothers had plans far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. What were they preparing for next? Stay with us as we unravel the twisted tale of the Bever family massacre. On the surface, the Bever family seemed like any other in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. David and April Bever, parents of 7 children, lived a quiet, seemingly idyllic life in the suburbs. David, a devoted father, worked hard to provide for his family, while April stayed home, homeschooling their children. They were well known in their community, often described as friendly, but reserved. They kept to themselves, never drawing too much attention. But what did their quiet lives really hide? Could it be that beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect family, there was a growing darkness? The children, ranging in age from a toddler to teenagers, were kept isolated from their peers, with the family home serving as both their sanctuary and prison. Was it the isolation that began to create cracks in their otherwise normal facade? Or did something else push the Bever children toward violence? Among the 7 children, Robert and Michael Bever stood out as the oldest. Robert, at 18, was known for being quiet, but not in a way that raised alarm. His brother, Michael, at 16, was more outspoken but still very much part of the family's close-knit world. They spent most of their time at home, away from the social pressures of school. The family's approach to homeschooling, combined with the lack of close relationships outside the household, created an insular world for the Bever children. But were the Bever children truly safe inside that home? Was there more to their family dynamics than met the eye? As neighbors and friends described the family, many were quick to paint a picture of a good, Christian family, living the American dream. But how could this family, which appeared so unremarkable, be the breeding ground for a massacre so horrifying it would leave the nation speechless? And here's the most disturbing question of all. What kind of environment could have influenced 2 brothers to turn on their parents and siblings? In the next moments, we'll begin to unravel the early signs of violence that no one could see coming, and uncover what led Robert and Michael Bever down a terrifying path that would change the lives of their family forever. Stay with us. It was just another quiet evening in Broken Arrow. The Bever family, living in a modest suburban home, seemed like any other family. But by the time the clock struck midnight, their lives, and the lives of 5 others, would be forever erased. The night began like any other, with David and April Bever tucking their children into bed. Their children, ages 5 to 12, had no idea that within hours, their world would come crashing down in an act of incomprehensible violence. As the family slept, Robert, the eldest son, and his younger brother Michael quietly moved through the house. Their plan, one that had been months in the making, was about to unfold. Armed with knives, a hatchet, and a chilling resolve, they crept into the bedrooms, one by one. The first victim was David Bever, who was asleep when he was attacked. He was struck with such force that he never had a chance to fight back. Then, April, his wife, was next. The brothers spared no one. Their younger siblings, Daniel, Christopher, and Victoria, were also slaughtered in their beds. The brutality of the attack left the investigators speechless. Each victim was stabbed multiple times in a frenzy of rage and calculated cruelty. But amidst the bloodshed, there was one survivor, 12-year-old Daniel Bever, who, despite his severe injuries, managed to make a desperate call to 911. His voice, shaky and terrified, would forever echo in the minds of those who heard it. "Please, my family, they're all dead, help me." As the operator tried to reassure him, he could only give one chilling clue. 2 people were responsible for this horrific crime, and they were still in the house. But Daniel didn't make it. By the time paramedics arrived, he had succumbed to his injuries. The brothers, Robert and Michael, had already fled the scene, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable carnage. Yet, amidst the horror, one question remains. Why? What could possibly have driven these two brothers to slaughter their entire family? Was it a deep-seated resentment, or did they believe they could achieve something greater through their actions? Were they acting alone, or was there someone else pulling the strings? As authorities scoured the crime scene for clues, they uncovered a chilling piece of evidence that would soon send shockwaves through the investigation. But what did they find? And how did the brothers manage to slip away in the midst of the chaos? Stay with us as we uncover the twisted plan behind this unimaginable act and how the truth finally came to light. In the wake of the carnage, authorities were left searching for answers that would reveal a chilling truth. The killers were not strangers. They were not random invaders, but the Bever brothers, Robert, 18, and Michael, 16, the sons of David and April Bever. How could two boys, raised in a seemingly normal suburban home, carry out such a horrific act? What twisted thoughts could have driven them to slaughter their entire family, including their young siblings? Robert Bever had always been the quieter, more reserved of the two. But it wasn't just the silence that made him stand out, it was the unsettling darkness that seemed to grow around him. Neighbors would later recall that he had become increasingly isolated over the years, spending more time online, fixated on disturbing topics. His younger brother, Michael, followed a similar path. But while Robert had a methodical, calculating demeanor, Michael's actions seemed driven more by a desire for validation. Together, they made a dangerous pair. The question echoed, what led them to this point? What was the catalyst that pushed the brothers from fantasy to brutal reality? Investigators uncovered disturbing journal entries, full of violence and dark musings. These weren't mere teenage scribblings, these were meticulously planned thoughts. Robert had written in his journal for months, detailing his desire for infamy. He wasn't looking to simply end the lives of his parents and siblings. No. Robert dreamed of surpassing infamous killers like the Columbine shooters. He saw himself as part of a dark legacy, as though committing a massacre would grant him the fame he craved. But Michael? Was he merely a follower, a participant in his brother's twisted vision? Or did he have his own dark motives? It was hard to tell. As the investigation deepened, authorities learned that the brothers had been plotting the murders for months. They had a plan. First, murder their parents and siblings, then execute a mass shooting at a local shopping center to complete their dark ambition. Their plans didn't stop with their family, they had visions of a much larger bloodshed. And yet, despite their preparations, despite their clear desire for notoriety, the attack still shocked those closest to them. But what about the aftermath? What went through Robert and Michael's minds when they realized they had crossed a line from which there was no return? Did they feel the weight of what they had done, or did they see themselves as successful, their names already etched in infamy? As the police closed in, the brothers were confronted by a reality they couldn't escape. Their horrific actions had made them criminals, but the questions remained: what was going on in their minds as they were arrested? And what would happen next as their twisted plan unraveled in the courtroom? Next, we'll explore how the investigation exposed even more unsettling details about the Bever brothers' lives, and how their chilling confessions only deepened the mystery. How would the community, and their surviving siblings, cope with the truth? What would drive two brothers, raised in the same home, to massacre their own family? Was it revenge, desperation, or something far more disturbing? The Bever brothers, Robert and Michael, weren't just seeking a momentary outburst of violence. They were driven by something deeper, something darker. It wasn't a sudden fit of rage. It was the culmination of months, even years, of careful planning. Robert, the eldest at 18, had a dark fascination with notorious mass murderers. He devoured news articles, watched documentaries about the Columbine killers, and fantasized about achieving the same kind of infamy. But for Robert and his 16-year-old brother, Michael, it wasn't just about the act of murder. They wanted the world to know their names. They wanted to be remembered. The brothers' twisted plans were meticulously documented. In journals and on online forums, they spoke about their need for recognition, their desire to outshine others who had committed heinous crimes. Robert often shared his thoughts about wanting to be famous. But more than that, he wanted to be infamous, a name forever associated with mass murder. What did Robert hope to achieve through this violent spree? Was it the fame? Was it the power? Or was it simply the urge to prove something to himself? To feel the satisfaction of executing a plan so intricate, so terrifying, that it would send shockwaves across the nation? But their plan didn't end with the brutal slayings of their family members. There was more. After killing their parents and siblings, they intended to take their killing spree beyond the walls of the Bever home. Their next target was far more ambitious. What was it? Was it just the thrill of taking lives, or was there a more sinister goal? Robert and Michael had every intention of staging a mass shooting, one that would rival the atrocities committed by the most infamous mass murderers in American history. They had guns and ammunition prepared. They were ready to take their carnage to the next level. But before they could carry out their next move, something interrupted their plan. The survivors, Crystal and Autumn, had already begun to piece together the puzzle. They were the key to unraveling the brothers' sinister intentions. How did the brothers react when they realized they were on the verge of being caught? What did they do next? Stay tuned as we uncover the chilling truth behind the brothers' arrest, and what other disturbing plans they had in store for the world. The investigation into the Bever family murders began as a frantic search for answers. As law enforcement arrived at the scene, they were met with a gruesome tableau: 5 members of the Bever family brutally slain in their home. With so much bloodshed and no immediate suspect, the case quickly escalated into one of the most baffling in Broken Arrow's history. But there was one critical piece of evidence that no one expected. In the midst of the carnage, a phone call shattered the silence. A 911 call made by 12-year-old Daniel Bever, the youngest of the victims. His voice, gasping for breath, barely clung to life as he told the operator, "My brothers, they killed my family." The chilling reality set in. The killers were not strangers. They were the victims' own sons, Robert and Michael Bever. But how could 2 brothers, raised in the same home, turn on their family with such brutal violence? Investigators found that the brothers had meticulously planned the murders for months. They had stocked up on weapons, including knives and a hatchet. They had even discussed their motives in detail. Robert, who had an intense desire for notoriety, wanted to surpass infamous mass murderers like the Columbine killers. The brothers' dark ambitions were clearly written in their journals and online activity, revealing that this massacre was just the beginning of their twisted plans. By the morning of July 23, 2015, the brothers were on the run. But it didn't take long before Robert and Michael were found, just hours after the murders, hiding in the woods near their home. They were arrested without incident, their expressionless faces betraying little emotion as they were taken into custody. The coldness of their capture sent a chilling message. This wasn't an act of rage, it was a cold, calculated crime. As the investigation deepened, authorities uncovered more disturbing evidence. The brothers had not just planned the murders, they had also envisioned a much larger massacre, one that would involve mass killings of strangers in a public setting. But what stopped them from carrying out their grand design? Was it fear, or did something else intervene? What were their true intentions? The moment of truth was approaching. Robert and Michael Bever would soon face trial for the murders of their family, but the question remained: were they simply products of a broken family, or were they truly evil, driven by something much darker? Stay with us as we uncover the twisted motives behind the Bever brothers' chilling crime, and the surprising revelations that came to light during their trial. The community of Broken Arrow was still reeling from the gruesome events of July 22, 2015, but the investigation was just the beginning of the story. The real question that lingered in the minds of many was not just how the Bever brothers could commit such an atrocity, but why? And what would the legal consequences be for their heinous actions? Robert Bever, the eldest of the 2 brothers, was the first to face trial. He had already confessed to the murders in a police interview, but would his plea in court match the chilling details he had provided earlier? On the day of his trial, he showed no signs of remorse as he faced the families of his victims. But as the courtroom drama unfolded, something unexpected happened. In an emotional moment, Robert Bever broke down in front of the judge and the victims' families. Was it genuine remorse, or a calculated attempt to manipulate the court's view of him? The courtroom was silent as he sobbed uncontrollably, but the question remained, could anyone truly believe his tears after such a brutal act? Robert Bever's defense team eventually reached a plea deal with prosecutors. He would plead guilty to the murders of his family members in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court, while acknowledging the gravity of his actions, ultimately agreed to this sentence. But did this plea deal provide any sense of closure for the surviving members of the Bever family, or had Robert manipulated the system to avoid the death penalty? As he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life behind bars, the courtroom filled with a tense silence. Could this life sentence truly pay for the pain he caused? Or was this just the beginning of a much darker truth that remained buried? Next, all eyes turned to Michael Bever, the younger of the two brothers. Unlike Robert, Michael had shown little emotion in the aftermath of the killings. His silence and seeming detachment left many wondering whether he had been fully aware of his brother's plan, or if he was simply a pawn in Robert's quest for infamy. In Michael's trial, the prosecution focused heavily on his lack of remorse. They painted a chilling picture of the brothers' plans to commit a mass shooting after the family murders, a plan that was only thwarted when police captured them. But as the trial wore on, Michael's defense team pushed back, arguing that his mental state was impaired at the time of the killings. Was Michael Bever truly in control of his actions, or had he been swept up in a storm of delusion and mental illness? On the final day of Michael Bever's trial, the judge handed down a verdict: life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after 85 years. The survivors of the Bever family, including Crystal, who had bravely testified, could only watch in disbelief as the young killer was led away. The court had made its decision, but would Michael ever be granted parole? And would he ever admit to the depths of his guilt? The question hung in the air, unresolved. The court cases might have come to a close, but for the victims' families, the scars of that night would never fully heal. As the Bever brothers faced the consequences of their actions, the question remained, what's next for them? With Robert sentenced to life without parole and Michael facing decades behind bars, the possibility of redemption seemed slim. But as time passed, both brothers would find themselves facing even more complex questions. Would either of them ever truly face the reality of what they did, or were they doomed to live in denial? But what of the surviving Bever siblings? As Crystal and Autumn move forward with their lives, will the haunting memories of that night ever truly fade? The small town of Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, was forever changed by the events of that night. For years, it had been a place where neighbors exchanged pleasantries, where families lived relatively quiet lives. But the Bever family murders shattered that illusion. As word spread through the community, disbelief turned into shock and then into grief. How could this happen? How could two brothers, raised in the same home, commit such a heinous act against their own family? Neighbors, friends, and even strangers struggled to understand the motive behind this brutal crime. For the survivors, the trauma was only beginning. Crystal, the 13-year-old girl who witnessed her family's brutal murder, was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her life. She and her 2-year-old sister, Autumn, were the only survivors of the massacre. Crystal had to grapple not only with the horrific events she witnessed but also with the knowledge that her brothers were the perpetrators. What does it feel like to face the people who murdered your family? While Crystal struggled to make sense of the devastation, the community rallied around her and Autumn, offering support. Yet, how could a community heal from a tragedy of this magnitude? The Bever family's house, where the massacre had occurred, stood as a haunting reminder of that fateful night. Many felt that the house should be torn down, a gesture of closure for the victims. But that was easier said than done. Some questioned, what happens to a community when such evil exists just under the surface, hidden behind the walls of a seemingly ordinary home? Despite the outpouring of support, there were also troubling whispers. Some wondered if there had been warning signs all along. Could the tragedy have been prevented? Did the Bever family know what their sons were capable of, or were they blindsided by this sudden, brutal eruption of violence? The investigation and subsequent trials only added to the tension. As the Bever brothers were arrested and the details of their chilling plan were revealed, the town was forced to confront uncomfortable truths. The community, now inextricably linked to the case, began questioning how deep this dark reality ran. Could anyone have seen this coming? And how does a community rebuild after such a catastrophic loss? The legal proceedings brought some sense of closure, but the emotional scars would remain for years to come. Was justice truly served? Or would the haunting memories of that night continue to linger over Broken Arrow like an unshakable shadow? But there's one last question that remains unanswered. What's next for the survivors? How do you find the strength to rebuild after losing everything? Stay tuned as we explore the lasting impact on the Bever brothers' surviving family, and the lessons this case can teach us about the darker corners of the human mind. The Bever brothers, Robert and Michael, were not mere criminals. They were products of a deep psychological complexity. To understand why they committed such a heinous act, we need to explore the forces that shaped them. What was it that twisted their minds and led them to massacre their own family? Robert, the older of the two, had been known to display odd behavior for years. He was introverted, often isolating himself from his peers. But it wasn't just the social withdrawal that concerned those around him, it was his increasing fascination with violence. Experts say Robert's obsessive thoughts about mass murder were a defining trait, seen in his journals and online activity long before the murders took place. Michael, his younger brother, appeared to follow Robert's lead. Initially, Michael was described as more personable, but over time, he too fell into a dangerous mental spiral, echoing Robert's beliefs. Their shared fascination with violent media, films, video games, and news stories about infamous killers was evident. These were not just idle interests, they were obsessions that seemed to fuel their fantasies of murder. Their online history tells a chilling tale. Both brothers had been spending hours in online forums dedicated to violence. They expressed admiration for past mass killers, like the Columbine shooters, and shared fantasies of surpassing them in infamy. They even researched other mass killings and started to build a twisted idea of fame through violence. Their desire for notoriety wasn't just a passing thought, it was their driving force. Psychologists suggest that Robert and Michael were not simply acting out of anger or frustration with their family. Their crimes seemed calculated, almost methodical, with chilling precision. They had been planning the murders for months. Robert, in particular, kept detailed journals outlining the massacre and their plan for escape. These weren't the ramblings of a desperate mind, they were the chilling plans of individuals who believed they could gain fame through death. But what makes their actions even more disturbing is the apparent lack of remorse or empathy for their victims. Despite their young ages, the brothers showed no signs of feeling guilty or emotional about their crime. In fact, after the murders, when law enforcement arrived at the scene, they were eerily calm. The lack of an emotional response to such a violent act is a hallmark of psychopathy, a condition that makes it difficult for individuals to empathize with others or understand the consequences of their actions. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that their upbringing might have contributed to their mindset, but it was by no means the sole cause. Robert and Michael's parents, David and April, were described as loving and supportive. However, like many families, they also had their own issues. The parents' strict rules, combined with a highly sheltered and insular life, may have contributed to the brothers' isolation. But experts argue that it was the brothers' internal struggles and their unhealthy obsession with violence that ultimately led them down this path. The Bever brothers weren't just motivated by a desire to escape their family, they were driven by a dangerous need for notoriety, fame, and recognition. They sought to be remembered, not for their talents or achievements, but for the terror they could inflict. This desire for infamy is a theme that echoes throughout history and continues to fuel other mass murderers today. Their psychological profile reveals that this was no spontaneous act of rage, it was premeditated, cold, and calculated. And it was born from the minds of two young men who saw mass murder not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity for fame. But what does this say about society? About the impact of media, of violent portrayals in video games, and the dangerous fascination with infamy? Could this have been prevented? And what does it mean for Crystal and Autumn, the two survivors who were left to grapple with the unimaginable? As we piece together the events of that night, it's clear that the Bever brothers were more than just killers. They were deeply disturbed individuals, whose need for recognition led them down a path that ultimately destroyed their family, and altered the course of their lives forever. As the final gavel came down in the Bever brothers' trial, the question that lingered in the minds of many was simple yet haunting. Why? What could drive two young men to murder their own flesh and blood with such cold precision? The legacy of their actions left more than just a scar on their family. It shattered a quiet community and cast a long shadow over the town of Broken Arrow. Robert and Michael Bever's twisted desire for notoriety led to the senseless deaths of 5 innocent people. Their obsession with fame, fueled by a fascination with infamous killers, played a crucial role in this horrific act. The brothers didn't just want to end their families' lives, they wanted to make a statement, to be remembered as the next great names in a long line of mass murderers. But, at what cost? The survivors, Crystal and Autumn, were left to rebuild their lives, haunted by memories they will never escape. They, along with the rest of Broken Arrow, will forever live with the echoes of that night. It's a reminder that violence can erupt from places we least expect, from within our own homes, from those we trust the most. In the aftermath, we are left to reflect on the broken pieces of the Bever family. We ask ourselves how we, as a society, can prevent such tragedies, how we can intervene before a dark obsession spirals into a nightmare. And most haunting of all, we wonder what drives a person to walk that line between normalcy and madness, and whether anyone could have seen it coming. The case of Robert and Michael Bever is a grim reminder that evil can sometimes come from the most unexpected places. It's a tragedy that will haunt us for years to come. And as you reflect on this case, ask yourself, what can we learn from these tragic events to prevent something like this from ever happening again? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell for more chilling true crime stories.